Minecraft interiors can be a little bit tricky, but they don't have to be. The method I use for decorating the inside of a house is super simple and only involves 3 steps. Today I'll take you through what those steps are as we build the interior of this lovely house right here. Now this house is completely empty, and I mean completely. I haven't touched the inside at all, which means we're ready for step 1. Floors, walls, and ceilings. So the first thing I do with any of my builds is figure out how I'm going to divide up each of the rooms / floors. So for this one, it's pretty simple. I can quite clearly see there's going to be a bottom level, a top level, and then potentially a loft. We'll see. Of course, your house may be bigger, with more shapes to work with, more rooms to add in, basically not just a rectangle. But that's kind of the beauty of this method. It should work universally among every single build. It's basically what I find to be the easiest order to do everything in. So you can either tackle the floor, ceilings, or walls first, whatever you prefer really. In this case, I think since we're going to be splitting it in 2 and having a bottom and top floor, we should probably do what is going to be the floor to this level and the ceiling to this level. We can kind of do a 2-for-1 deal. I'm going to use beehives because I really do quite like this texture. As you can see, just like that, we have a lovely floor to get up here. We will add some kind of staircase in eventually, but we don't need to worry about that just yet. So what I'm actually thinking for down here, since we have a bit of room on the ceiling to this floor, we could do something that's not quite as flat. And what I love to do is combining spruce slabs, or any wood type really. I just find these have the best trapdoor variant, and putting those trapdoors alongside, and then you kind of get this beam look, and I think it just looks a little bit better than having the completely flat ceiling. And while we're down here, we may as well sort out the floor. This is pretty basic. You just take out the grass or whatever block you're currently building on top of and replace it with another block, something that's a bit nicer. In this case, I'm using one of my favorite floor designs, which is to grab some strip logs and alternate them like this so you get a checkerboard pattern, which looks pretty neat. Not forgetting the door too. Now we are trapped, which means it's time to figure out how to get up to the next level. We could use something like a ladder, would be very space efficient, but I just find adding in a staircase makes it seem more like a house as opposed to a base, if that makes sense. In my head it does. So I usually pick what is the biggest wall that's not by the door, just so we got the most space really. And then we're just going to staircase our way up. Of course, we kind of have to break the ceiling as we go, but we can always neaten up afterwards. I also usually like to use a stair block that is similar to the block that I'm using for the floor up here. I just think it looks a bit nicer than, say, if we had a spruce stair right here. If we made the stairs out of spruce, it doesn't look as nice as the oak, I don't think. Now the staircase down the bottom looks a little bit ugly, and I have got an idea that we'll get to later that I think is going to look slightly better than this, but for the meantime, that's a definite improvement. Now this step was all about floors, walls, and ceiling. The floors and the ceiling have needed a touch up, but the walls haven't really. I mean, lucky enough that the way I've built the exterior looks pretty nice from the inside too, but that won't always be the case. Let's say I ended up building these brick blocks back by a block, a little bit like what I did here with the white terracotta, so that the oak logs would be sticking out by a block. Right? Got that? Well, the inside would look a little bit like this, which probably not the best. Now you could just simply cover that up with bricks. You'd end up with a pretty plain wall though. You could also bring the oak logs forward and just kind of fill in the space. That looks fine. But you could also utilize this chance to just do something else on the interior to make it look separate to the exterior. But as I've already said, the walls are fine in here, but in your case, they might not be. This step is just about neatening things up really, so that you look like you have an unfurnished house, as opposed to just an empty shell of a building. I think I've decided that we're not going to go for a loft in here, mainly because of these tall windows. We could cut it off right here, but then we've got the problem of half the window is down here, half the window's up here. It's just not going to look great, I don't think. So instead, we're going to have a nice tall ceiling, and in this case, it's once again pretty simple. We're just going under the oak stairs with some spruce stairs. Now, I like this, but I do think it's a bit too much empty space. Having this much openness can work, but I don't think it's working in this specific house. I want something that feels less spacious. So what I'm going to do is actually just take out these two stairs right here and add in some beams, sort of like you'd see in an old Victorian house or something like that, you know? Structural supports. So it doesn't provide any sort of benefit, it's purely aesthetic, but it just closes off that space so it's not super open. And I'm thinking maybe some spruce trapdoors underneath, just for an extra bit of detail. But yeah, oops, let's not fall down the stairs. There we are. In my opinion, that looks a little bit nicer, but of course, you may want to just leave the big open ceiling. So there we are, we have our ceilings, our walls, and our floors for both of the two levels here. It's now actually looking like a house. Which means we can move on to step 2, the main stuff. What I mean by this is going around to all of your rooms and figuring out what you definitely want to have in there, which is usually the bigger of the blocks. So we're talking bed, chest, crafting table, most of your utility blocks that you'd need in survival, but also anything else aesthetic you want to add in that's going to take up a large area. Basically just everything but the details. That's step 3. I like to build my houses in a way that I combine form and function, so having all of the helpful survival items like the stuff you're seeing on my hotbar, but also some nice decorative things so it's not just full of blocks like this, and add some actual character to the house. Having said that, this is the sort of stuff I tend to add in first, just so I know I've got room for it. So I think the best way to do this is to figure out roughly what you'd like in all of the rooms. Thankfully, I've got it pretty easy here. There's only 2 rooms, so I can quite simply just decide that, for example, I want the furnaces on the bottom floor and maybe crafting too. And then up here where we've got a bit more room, we can have some storage and my bed in a corner, probably over here most likely. So just sort of gauging where you want the important things to actually go. But just to keep it simple, we're going to work on one room at a time, starting on the bottom floor, which as I said, we're going to have furnaces and crafting. Maybe something over on this wall, though if you can remember, I said I had an idea for how we can make the staircase look a bit more interesting. So let's actually do this bit first, since that's kind of the purpose of this step. It's not just these sort of blocks, it's the big stuff, the things that take up a lot of room. So what we're actually going to do is make this staircase into a bit of a bookshelf. So because oak stairs are roughly the same color as the outline of a bookshelf, it means they blend pretty seamlessly, so we can just do something like that. And it doesn't really look like a super harsh line where the staircase is. We can also, if we'd like to, add in some chiseled bookshelves because we have those now. And just so they're not completely empty, we can just put some regular books inside of them, which nicely varies it up a little bit. And the main reason why I wanted this here, not only does it fill in this open space, but also gives us a lovely little nook looking out into the window here, which we'll come back to later. Now we can turn our attention to our smelting area, which I think is definitely going to go in this corner. It's a good amount of space and probably the main thing of importance on this floor. Now, when I add in a smelting array, very small one at that, I do like to have smokers and blast furnaces, just so I got the option to use them if needed. So we'll keep to the 2 furnaces lined up with the window. I think that's always a good idea. And it is just kind of helpful to have a crafting bench. So we may also stick one upstairs, just so we got it on hand. But having it next to the furnaces isn't a bad idea. And another item, brewing stands. I think they match with the aesthetic of the furnaces pretty well. Now, these are the type of things you might find you need more of as you progress further into your world, like multiple brewing stands or a super smelter. That is what you can always utilize the underground for. You got unlimited room down there, and you don't have to build an exterior. Or you could just make a completely separate building. But this is more tailored to smaller houses that, for example, can't fit an entire 64 furnace array inside of, which is probably most normal houses. That's pretty much all I'm going to do for down here for now. I have had an idea of possibly, if we can't think of anything else to stick here, a small set of table and chairs doesn't hurt and just nicely fills in the space and adds something that's not functional, just purely aesthetic. It's nice. But the bonus is we can always come back and change that later when we start adding in some other stuff. But for now, we're up here and ready to tackle the bigger room. The first thing I'm going to do up here isn't actually related to storage or beds or anything like that. It's actually just to kind of separate off the staircase. I don't think just having an open hole in the floor, one, functions very well, and two, looks very good. So what I usually do is just kind of fence off the area, sometimes with actual fences or trapdoors. Just have a play around, you know, and just to make it look slightly different. So it's not all fences, we'll put some fence gates in there too. You could even, depending on the location of your staircase and how it kind of fits with the whole room, add in a bit of a room divider using trapdoors. I like to use these things quite a lot, and I think it just breaks up all of the empty space and is a nice little addition to a room, but the way the staircase is positioned here doesn't really work. Next up is storage. No matter the house, I always like to add in quite a number of chests as opposed to just one or two. In this case, I think we're actually going to line the back there with some chests, and then we could do two more there, but just to change it up a little bit, maybe we'll put a couple of barrels underneath, and that way we kind of fill in this space and actually utilize it for something instead of just leaving it completely open. This right here is a pretty good example of form and function. Not only do we have a fair amount of storage, probably good enough for a house of this size, but it looks good, or it looks better than just stacking a bunch in a corner somewhere. So I'm now left with these remaining utility blocks, which are something I try to put down in all of my houses, just so I've got them on hand. The bed, pretty easy. I think this right here is going to be a good spot. We'll probably do something a bit more with it later, but for now, we've got a section for sleeping separated away, which is good. Then we've got the rest of the utility blocks, which don't really fit that well anywhere. The loom is a bit better than most because it has this side texture. Yours probably doesn't have those pixels, but it looks a bit like a set of drawers or some sort of storage, so you can kind of pull it off just by putting it in a corner somewhere. Stone cutters, they don't really look good anywhere, especially in a house like this. They're sort of better if it's an outside block, but they are super helpful, so maybe we'll just keep those two in the corner. Next up, the cartography table and smithing table. We could put them just beside that, but I think having 4 of them in a row, it's a bit too much. We need them separate, so what we're actually going to do is replace the barrels with those two, which doesn't look great. They don't really match with the aesthetic of the rest of the house. They're a bit too dark. But they're kind of tucked out the way and there if we need them. And then the grindstone and anvil. Usually I'd put these with an enchanting setup, but I can't fit one of them in this house, so what we're going to do instead is actually hide them out the way on top of the pillars here. So you can't really see them, not that well anyway, at least at a quick glance, but you should still be able to reach them even in survival mode. So yeah, I think that gets them nicely out the way, but again, still able to use them. So that right there is all of the main stuff added in for both of the 2 levels, which is a pretty good start, but we still do have quite a lot of empty space remaining, which is where step 3 comes in. The small stuff, or just details, really. I think the best way to go about this is to kind of look at each little section of your house interior and decide what else could you add to make it better, or even if it needs anything. So for example, we got our furnace array right here. I don't think it needs much, but there are a couple of things we could probably place on top of the blocks here, just to add a little bit more, such as a lantern or some other lighting source, which is always good to have so you don't get mob spawning. Gonna stick a stone pressure plate just for a bit of a different stovetop or something like that. And then something that I like to do in the kitchen kind of area, don't know where this would best fit, but I do a banner on the bottom of a block and it kind of looks like a towel. Over here with our bookshelf, this spot is begging for a flower. Looks great, right? However, what I think is going to be slightly better and just something that's a little bit different, because I'm going to use way more flower pots all over the rest of the house. They're a great little decorative, so when you can use something that's not them, I jump on the opportunity. So we're going to stick a lectern with a book and quill right in the middle, and you can always write something in here just to give it some more character as opposed to just being an empty lectern. And, you know, kind of matches with the rest of the bookshelf. Fits the vibe. Now I'm looking over here where we have our table and chairs, and I think it just looks a little bland compared to everything else, so I think we're actually going to replace this stair here with something else. In this case, a big decorative pot, and you can actually stick a small flower pot on top of that with a flower inside, just so you basically get a flower pot, but bigger. If you want to spice up the walls, paintings are always a good idea. However, I don't think there's really that great of a spot for a painting with our window configuration. I always like to have a little bit of space around the painting so it doesn't look super cramped. So what you can do instead is use an item frame. Because it doesn't take up a full block, you can kind of put it anywhere. And I'll stick a clock in there because, well, why not? And I think there's just one final thing we're going to add down here before calling it quits for this floor. And that is a small rug in the middle of the floor. And I think that just really nicely breaks up that open space and also gives a nice pop of color to our floor, which is overwhelmingly brown at the moment. And there we go, nicely furnished so that there's just a little bit more going on. We can now head upstairs and start work there. If you are struggling to think of some ideas of how to detail your space and you don't just want to use the same ideas as what I've got, because, you know, you have a different space to actually fill in. The room is going to be different dimensions, different colors, all this sort of stuff. One, you could just have a look through the creative menu, see what blocks kind of stand out and what you could use. Or two, just look online, head to Google image search, type in Minecraft interiors, or better yet, Pinterest is a great place to go. But back to this room. I've just been kind of staring at it from this corner here, thinking of where we need to add in some space. So I'm immediately thinking right here, we can have a rug, similar to what we did downstairs, just to fill in the empty floor space, as it's kind of difficult to build something here that isn't just gonna get in the way. A rug, you can walk right over it. We'll do a little bit more with the bed, try and build some sort of like frame around it. And then I do think we could do with having something between the chests and the stone cutter. This just looks like it's missing something. Obviously, first up, we can have our carpet, nicely filling in that space. As for the bed, I think if we just break it and move it forward a block, what we can do to begin with is something I like to do when I don't have that much room, but I want to make the bed look a bit more interesting. Sign at the end of it, kind of just looks like the foot of a bed. And then for the top bit here, so we can actually place some stuff on it. Gonna place some barrels all facing this way so we can get this texture. And then we just use some more spruce and kind of just build around it. So maybe it doesn't look like a super realistic bed if you had something like this surrounding that in real life. It looks super strange, but I think in Minecraft it works. Then obviously we've got the space on top of the barrels just to put some details. So a lantern. Sea pickles are always a great little thing to add if you want to just do something that's a simple decorative item that doesn't do anything. I like using sea pickles, they look good. And then we'll go with a big fat bell in the middle for a very loud alarm clock. I can also see that now we've got this bed frame in place, we definitely don't really need anything here where I'm stood. Over here though, we definitely do, and I was thinking originally just an armor stand. It's always a nice little detail to add in, especially if you actually put some armor on it. Then it also kind of serves as a function, but I think it just looks a little empty on its own. So instead, what we're going to do is build a small wardrobe of sorts around it using trapdoors. because these things are pretty small and they don't take up much space, it means we can make a pretty sleek cupboard almost to put it inside of. And then we should just be able to place one on top. Yeah, I like that. That's cool. There is also nothing stopping us from putting a painting behind it, if we wanted that at all. I'm not sure. Maybe. We need to get some armor on there, really, to have a proper look. Something I always forget is that you can add multiple colors to leather to give it a bit of a different look, so it's not just one of the basic ones. This person obviously isn't very color coordinated, but it does just make it that little bit more interesting. And then when we put it on the actual armor stand, it just looks a little bit better, I think. And yeah, we'll keep the painting. Why not? Add some color behind it as opposed to just oak. Another thing we can add in, not only to further fill in this space here at the top, but also provide some more light, is to just hang a lantern from the ceiling. Tiny little detail here, but still pretty important. Just by putting a trapdoor on top of the loom there, makes it look a lot better. You can't see the top that way. We are also just going to replace this beehive with a crafting table. I don't think it ruins the floor at all. Looks pretty cohesive with the rest of the blocks around it. And they're just always really helpful to have on hand. It would be annoying going through your storage here and having to go downstairs to craft something. Alright, this is all looking pretty good. I just think there's one area that needs something else, and it's this wall. We don't really have anything else but a bunch of chests, and I'm thinking some shelves might be pretty nice. And when I say shelves, I of course mean trapdoors with stuff on top of them. In this case, we're going to do some flower pots with some saplings inside. And just by adding that, not only do we get that little bit of color, but also just fills in some more space. So it's not just chests, which I think is quite nice. So there we go, everybody. That is how I build my Minecraft interiors. The house is done. I'm sure there's some other things we could add in, and if this was my actual house, I'd probably put a few more things down over the course of time when I see fit. But for right now, I'm pretty happy with how this looks, and I really hope this video has been helpful to you guys. Let me know if it has. I'm never really too sure when I do these sort of videos and try and teach something if I'm making any sort of sense, or if it just goes way over your head. So I would appreciate if you could let me know. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. I really hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next time. Bye for now.